Today's tutorial, I'm going to go through the step-by-step process and how I made this painting in Procreate, so feel free to paint along and let's get into it. Alright, so the canvas size here is about 3883 by about 2698 pixels. So the brushes I'll be using are going to be from the painting section in Procreate. So the round brush, flat brush, the Salamanca, and I may use some soft brush from the airbrushing section. Make sure that we're on layer 1, and I'm going to select a warm color here, maybe like a warm yellow orange kind of color, and select close to white but not quite there, so a very light warm color. And I'm going to choose the flat brush, and again we're on layer 1. I'm just going to paint this layer in with this color. Alright, now we have layer 1, which is going to be our sky layer, and I'm going to create a new layer above that. So I'm going to tap on the plus icon to create layer 2. Before we get into painting on layer 2, I want to make sure that we have a perspective grid in here. So I'm going to go to the top left wrench icon. I'm going to turn on drawing guide, go to edit drawing guide, and I want to turn on perspective. Make sure that perspective is selected, and I'm going to tap on the screen. And that's going to get in a vanishing point and a horizon line. And so we're not going to worry too much about the vanishing point, which is this blue dot in the middle, but what we need to focus on is the horizon line. And so the horizon line is going to be important because that is where the eye level of the viewer of the scene is going to be. So we'll have this at about the bottom third of the canvas. I'm not going to get too complex into perspective and all of that, but this will help us structure the scene and just know where to place things. So we want this again at the bottom third, so something about there should be fine. And I can turn down the opacity here. I'll put it to about 30%, so it's not as visible and it doesn't get in the way as much. So after we have the perspective grid in, we can select done and move on to the next step. So the next step here, we will make sure that we're on layer 2. And I'm going to go to the selection tool, which is the S-shaped icon up there at the top left, and I'm going to select the rectangle, and I want to get in a rectangle shape or rectangle selection just about to that blue horizon line. So I'll go just slightly under it, and that should be good. And I'm going to paint in a kind of a green yellow neutral color, kind of a mid-tone color there, so something about there should be fine. And I'll paint that in with a flat brush. Maybe we can go a little lighter. Something like that should be fine. Okay, so now we have the sky layer and we have this grass layer. So now I'm going to go to the sky layer, layer 1, and create a new layer above that. So now we have layer 3, and I'm going to use the selection tool again and set it to freehand mode this time, so we can freely create a selection. We can freely draw in a selection here. I'm going to start on the left side of the canvas about over here and just start to draw in a mountain shape. Right? We want it to be kind of irregular and natural, right? Because this is a mountain. So try not to have it be too repetitive or too similar with the shape that you make. And to finish the selection, you can just tap on that gray circle there, and that completes the selection. Now we can paint it in with a color. So I'm going to use a warmer, probably like an orange mid-tone, kind of maybe more saturated orange. I guess it's about a mid-tone orange, and just paint that in with a flat brush. The color doesn't matter too much right now, but as long as it's this kind of this warm orange color, that should be good. And we can change up the edges of the shape if we feel like we want to, mess with the edges or clean up some of the edges. Like for example, right here, maybe I'll want to make this just one shape right there. We can paint that in, and, so you can edit your shape and keep on refining it, but for now I think this is okay. We can move on to the next step. So we'll go back to layer 1, and I'm going to create a new layer here. So tap on the plus icon, and now we should have layer 4. And now everything we paint on layer 4 will be behind this mountain shape that we just painted here. So and we can get some further mountains in the background And to do that, I'm going to select more of a red orange. So we'll move this slightly more into the reds and maybe just a little more saturated and slightly darker. And we're going to paint these mountains in. You can paint them in by hand by just, painting in with a brush, or you can use the selection tool like how I just did that before. I'm going to use the selection tool here and just to get in some clean edges and just paint in these mountains or draw in these mountains, make the selection and then paint them in. All right, so we have the sky layer, these two mountain layers, and we have a grass layer here. The next step, I want to go to this mountain layer, layer 3. I'm going to tap on the plus icon to make a new layer and tap on this new layer and set it to clipping mask. So everything that we paint will be within this shape of the mountain. So we can't break the silhouette, so it's good for keeping things clean. So on layer 5, I'm going to select a cooler, maybe more like a blue color here, a little more neutral. So somewhere around here, kind of a washed out blue color. And I'm going to paint in maybe a little darker than that. I'm going to paint in some of these shadows. So we want to create some form onto this rock because we just have some flat shapes with flat colors right now. So I want to get in some form. And one of the best ways to do that is to create shadows and lighting. And before we paint the shadows here, I guess I should clarify where the lighting is going to be coming from. So we're going to have the lighting coming from the left side of the screen. So it's going to be coming this way. All right, so we can continue to paint in these shadows here. And just want to create some form and some three-dimensionality onto these mountains. And again, I'm just using the flat brush. And I'm going to use the selection tool here as well to maybe get some clean edges, but really not too much more complex than that. And I don't want to get too detailed or complicated with these shapes. These mountains are somewhat far away, so we're not going to see too many details. And we don't want the scene to become too noisy or anything. So I'll keep them pretty simple, pretty easy to understand what we're looking at. Alright, so I think this should do for now. So I'll move on to layer 4 and do the same thing. So I'll create a new layer above that and set it to clipping mask. And I will paint in with maybe a slightly lighter, just slightly lighter blue. It's really not much of a difference here, but I'll just paint in some of these shadows onto these background mountains. All right, I think that's all right for now as well. Again, as always, we can come back and add more to it later if we think we need to, but for now, I'm gonna move on to the next step. So I wanna go to layer 2, and I'll add a clipping mask above it, so I'll add a new layer and set it to clipping mask. And we're gonna start to paint in some of these grass shapes in here. So I'll go to the brushes and I'll select the Salamanca brush. And I'm gonna sample the grass color here, and I'm gonna make it slightly lighter. And I'll start to paint in some of these paint strokes that will hopefully resemble grass. We want to make sure that our paint strokes are thicker in the foreground, and as we start to recede back into the scene, they will start to get thinner and thinner in perspective. Okay, and so this really makes it feel like things are starting to recede back. Ideally, they should be thinner, they should be lighter as well as we get back further, so something like this would be lighter. And this is kind of the general idea that we want to follow when painting grass in perspective. So I'm going to get rid of this layer here, and we'll go back to layer 7, and I'm going to go back to the Salamanca brush and paint in some more darker grass shapes in here. So, but this grass in the foreground, again, these brush strokes are much thicker and just broader brush strokes, right? And as we start to go back into the perspective, so closer to the horizon line down here, they'll get thinner and thinner, and the detail will become less noticeable, right? The shapes will start to merge more. So for example, say we go back a little bit further, we could still see some detail, but it's not as broad as the foreground grass. So I can make a selection there, and I'll paint in some grass here, but again, it's a thinner paint stroke, a thinner horizontal stroke. And then say we go back even further, we can make it even slightly thinner, all right? And so you can see it starts to feel like the grass is receding in the scene and going back into perspective. All right, because otherwise it's going to feel flat. If we make all of our paint strokes the same width, it will feel flat. And I could continue this even further back, and eventually it would just be, we just see, lines like this, right? Because it's so far back, we're not going to see the individual grass. It just kind of all groups together as a horizontal line. And you can break up some of the line here and there with this grass color that we selected, but right now we have some depth in there, and I just want to keep on building up some of this grass in the foreground and adding some more values into the scene so we have a nice balance. Again, I really like this Salamanca brush because it just gives a nice painterly feel, but also just it's an easy way to get some grass, organic grass shapes in there. So what I can do now is create a new layer above layer 7 and go to the inking brushes and select the thylacine brush. And I don't want to press too hard. Maybe I'll get a lighter color here. I don't want to press too hard. I just kind of want to get this soft impression. All right, and kind of get these grass shapes in there. And I'm keeping this on a separate layer because we may want to remove some of this later on, or if we feel like we went a little overboard, we can come in and maybe grab an airbrush and erase out some of what we've painted. So we don't have to commit to anything since it's on a separate layer here. All right, now on the same layer, I'm going to go to painting, go to the flat brush, and I'm just going to paint just a little bit down here to break up that, because we had a clean rectangle shape earlier, and I want that edge of the rectangle to be a little broken up with paint strokes, so it feels more natural and like there's grass down there. And maybe this is slightly too light of a color. Maybe I chose a little bit too light of a color, but I think it should be okay. I don't think it should be an issue. So hopefully y'all like these videos. I want to do more of these in this kind of style where I'm just, you know, much longer videos, but kind of designed more for you to paint along with me if you want to, and where I can just share some tips and share maybe some I don't know, some new ideas into painting and all that. So yeah, I definitely plan to do more of these if y'all find it helpful, and you know, that's the goal. I'm hoping to help somebody out there. So please do let me know if y'all have any recommendations or ideas for any other tutorials or any things you want to see, because I would definitely be happy to make those. All right, so the next thing I can do is go to the layers and add a new layer above layer 8. And I'm going to create these selections that kind of look like these grass shapes, these grass blades, right? And just draw these in, draw a bunch of them in. So I'm just making a selection and I'm tapping the gray circle there to complete the selection. And it's hard to see, but these selections are actually made. And I'm just creating a bunch of these, and I'm going to fill them in with a color once I make quite a few of them. Okay, so I think I have enough right now. I just want to see how it's looking. I'll go to the airbrushing and get a soft brush, and I'll make this one maybe a little more saturated and maybe slightly lighter, and I'll just paint in these selections that I've just made. And now you can see some grass shapes in the foreground, and if I feel like I need more, well, I can just draw in some more of these and do the same thing. Alright, something like that. Maybe I'll get rid of these right here. I feel like those weren't really helping. I feel like it started to look a little too repetitive. Okay, I'll go with this for now. I think this is good. Again, we can always remove this if we want to later on, but for now, I think that should be fine. All right, so I think we can move on to the next step. I'm going to collapse layer 8 and 7 just to clean up my layers. You don't have to if you're fine with having a bunch of layers. And I'm going to collapse 7 and 2 as well. I don't think we need to have those two separate. And so I'll create a new layer above layer 9 here. And this is going to be a layer for the tree branches. So I want to go to the painting brushes, and I'm going to select the flat brush. And maybe I'll get like a dark brown. So we'll go to the oranges, yellows, and get a dark brown in this bottom, kind of a desaturated brown. And I'm going to want to paint some tree branch shapes in here. So we'll start with this first one here. Just start to paint in the tree branch, or the tree trunk rather. And we want it to feel natural. Again, just as like how I was talking about the mountains, we want those to feel natural, not repetitive. Same thing with this. We don't want it to feel stiff or artificial or anything like that. So just try to make it feel organic. And again, I'm just using the flat brush to do this, so we can use the round brush as well. They're very similar brushes. It's just one of them is more rounded and one of them is more of like a rectangle shape. All right, and I think that's all right for the tree branch, for the trunk portions of the tree. So I will go and add a new layer on top of that now, and I'm going to select the flat brush again, but this time I'll get a more of a green color in here. So maybe like something like maybe a little lighter. So something maybe like this, like a kind of a more to the yellow green, maybe a slightly yellow neutral green color. And just paint this in. Again, we can always change the colors, so nothing needs to be perfect right now. And we're just painting in these masses of leaves, so I'm not worrying about individual leaves or individual details. I'm just creating these shapes of leaves here, trying to group. And I want some variety in the shapes. So I don't want all of the shapes to be the same size, right? So we have some smaller shapes here, we've got some medium shapes, and then we've got like this big shape right here at the top. And that's just going to create a nice variety that makes it feel more realistic. All right, and we have those leaves in. We can go back to the branch layer if you feel like you need to edit some of the branches, add some more smaller branches coming off, and then you can do that. Okay, I think that is about good. Maybe I'll erase some of the bottom here. And maybe I'll increase the size of this tree. So I'll select layer 8 and then I'll swipe to the right for layer 9. And now I have both of them selected, so now we can move both of them at the same time. And I'm just gonna increase the size here, so use the move tool and then make sure it's set to uniform, and we can just increase this tree size a little bit. And I'm gonna move it over to the right slightly just to help with the composition. So I want it in this area over here because this is about, let's see, 1/3 of the canvas would be about here, right? Something like that, roughly in this area. And it doesn't have to be exact, but it's not centered, right? It's not in the middle of the canvas. So I think this is just a nice composition to have it. Maybe I can even move it further over to the right a little bit. And yeah, I think that works. So we'll get in another tree here. We can do this one maybe back here. Again, just working with these natural branch shapes, and I'm going to get some leaves in on top of them in a second, but just trying to keep this organic. And then we can grass sample the same color that we use for the leaves. Go to layer 9 and just paint in some leaves. And I'm using the round brush to do this one. It doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll switch to the flat brush here. All right, so I'm going to paint in some more trees using the same approach that we did for these two, and I'll be back whenever that's done. Alright, so I have these trees in now and I'm feeling pretty good with how they look. So I want to make a few adjustments to them because I use the same colors to paint the branches for all these trees as well as the leaves. So now what I'll do is go to layer 9 and create a new layer above it and set it to clipping mask. And I'm going to grab an airbrush, the soft brush here, and I'm going to take a lighter green, maybe more of a blue green up here, and just make it a little lighter and just subtly paint the top of these leaves on these trees. So there's a subtle gradient. All right, now that we have that gradient painted in, I may hit the bottom of the leaves with a slightly darker airbrush just to get some of the shadow in there, but I don't want to go too overboard with that either, but just to kind of complete that gradient. Okay, and I think that the branches themselves could be lighter, so maybe I'll select the branch layer and just make it maybe 1 or 2 degrees lighter, maybe 3 degrees lighter. We'll go to 53 on the brightness, and I think that's better. Yeah, I think that works better. All right, so for the next step, I like how these trees are looking. I think the grass looks okay for now. Now, I think I want to work on these mountains a bit more. So I'm going to go to layer 3 and create a new layer. And automatically it's going to select a clipping mask layer because it's between a clipping mask, which is layer 5. And so it's going to set layer 11 here to clipping mask. And I can paint by using a flat brush or a round brush some more detail onto this, basically onto the orange parts of this mountain here. So to further add some three-dimensionality and form, I'm just going to get a lighter orange here and just paint maybe some highlights or some parts of the mountain that are getting a little bit more of that direct sunlight. And again, we don't want to go too overboard with the details as usual, but just to get that impression, some more color variety in there as well. And I can change it. We're going to sample this original color of the mountains here, and I'll get maybe more of like a pink orange in here, like a red orange, maybe slightly lighter than that, more into the pinks, and just paint some of that in here too. And again, I'm just getting some color variety and some more values. I'll go back to the shadow layer here and I'll paint in some more shadows. So I'll be bouncing back between these two layers to further develop the form on this mountain and just clean up the shapes and all that. All right, so here I just wanted to mention I'm going to actually collapse layer 5 and 11, and this is just for me. Again, if it's easier for you to keep everything separate, that's perfectly fine, but I'm doing this so I can just start painting without having to think of layers too much, so I can just freely paint into the shadows without having to worry about being on the shadow layer. So I'll be adding some darker values into these shadows too, just to get some more, maybe some deeper cuts into the mountains here where it gets darker. But the main thing I want to avoid is adding too much contrast, because once I start adding too much contrast, it's going to start to feel off. So I want to avoid that. It's like this here, I think this is too much contrast with the darker line here next to the sunlight. So I'm going to just slightly wash over that with a lighter value and take some of that contrast out of there. All right, so I'm gonna take a break from working on this mountain. I think I like where I've gotten it so far. I will most likely come back and add maybe some subtle details later on. But I've basically just gotten in this lighter orange here, right, along the edges here. I've gotten in this kind of pink, and of course this orange that you see here is kind of the underneath layer here, this flat color that we got in early on. So, and I've gotten in some darker kind of these cut lines into, or these cuts into the rocks here in the shadow, to just kind of get more of that form into the mountains. So that's really what I've been doing, and I want to take that same approach and apply it to these mountains back here, except not as much, right? Not as extreme, because these mountains are even further back, the ones back here. So I'll go to this layer and make a new layer above layer 4, and it's gonna create a clipping mask. And so now I can only paint on this kind of this orange part here. You can see it's only gonna show up on this orange part because we have the shadows above it. So we'll make sure we're on layer 11, and I want to paint in some more lighter colors onto this orange. I feel like this orange is a little dull right now, so maybe a little lighter, a little more washed out. We're just going to paint in, and I'm using the round brush, so it has pressure opacity, so if I press lightly, you know, we can get a very subtle build up of color here. And I'm just slowly building up this lighter orange onto this mountain here. I think that's better. And I'm going to do the same thing I did previously. I mentioned that I collapsed the 2 layers on this mountain. I'm going to do that here too. So I'll collapse layer 6 and layer 11, and just to give me more freedom to not have to keep pulling up the layer menu and switching layers, because sometimes that can get a bit in the way of what I'm really trying to do, which is just paint. Again, we don't want much contrast, even less so because these mountains are even further back, so we really should pay attention to how much contrast we're adding. See, if I was to add a very dark color here for the shadows, or for like the darker portions of the shadows, you can see that's a lot of contrast right here, too much contrast for it to be that far in the background. So we want to have, if we're going to add darker portions of the shadows, they should be very subtle, like what I'm doing here with this. See the difference in value from this to this isn't too much. You see here, it was only about that much, right? On the color palette. Not too much. So that's just grouping values, right? Making sure that the values are grouped in a way to where you can tell there's darker portions of the shadow back here, but it doesn't jump out at you. And so that's what I mean when I say make sure that your contrast isn't too high in certain areas. Now in certain areas we do want high contrast, where the focal point is and all that, but some areas we don't. All right, so I think those mountains are good for now as well. Maybe I'll add a few more details here or there, but I think these are good enough to move on as well. I'm happy with how they look. So I'll move on to the grass. I feel like the grass is kind of dull. It could use some more color and maybe a little bit more texture. So let's see what we can do with that. So I'll sample this darker color here, and I'll paint in just some more grass-like texture. Some detail, right? I'm just using the round brush. right, I'm gonna take layer 2, which is this rectangle of grass, and I'm gonna increase the saturation a little bit just to see how that looks. I'll try 65, and I'm gonna tap on the screen to pull up that menu, and I can press the preview button to see what it was like before. And I think that looks better. It just adds more color into the scene. So while this grass isn't in direct sunlight, there's still going to be some shadows that are cast from the trees based off of the ambient light hitting the trees. So we still want some shadows in there. I'm going to go above layer 9 and create a multiply layer. So this is basically a blend mode. So if we go to the layer panel here and we select the N, we can scroll up and make sure it's set to multiply. And you should see there's a little M there next to the check mark. And so we can then select go with a cool color, so like a neutral grayish blue color. And so what's going to happen is if I paint on the canvas, everything underneath what I paint is going to be darker, but it's not going to actually paint. It's not going to obscure the paint that I've made. So as you can see, it just darkens everything. And I can use this multiply effect to get some shadows in here. So I'll go make a selection with the freehand selection tool, and I'm just going to draw in under here these selections underneath the trees. Now for the trees back here, we might not need to do it because they're so far back, but I do want to do it on these 2 trees that are a little bit further up in the scene, and just to see how it looks. We can paint in here. I think that looks okay. Maybe I'll try to add some blur to it. Maybe. Yeah, I'll add like 1% of a Gaussian blur to it, which is basically just going to blur the edges a little bit. And I'm going to take that layer, tap on the M, and then just bring down the opacity a little bit. So it's going to be less strong and we can see through it more. I'll put it to about 60, 59 is fine. See, that's before and after, so it's less contrast, but it's still there. We can still see that there's shadow underneath. So it gives that effect without it being too strong. All right, so with that, I'm going to go back to the mountain layer here, so layer 11, and I'm going to keep painting in some details on this layer. So you might not need to, depending on how your mountains are looking, but there's a few things, like I said, that I just want to clean up. With that looking better, I'm going to go add a new layer below layer 2. So just tap the plus icon above layer 11 here. And I'm going to select this green that we've used for the trees, for the leaves of the trees. And I'm going to make it slightly lighter, just a little bit. And I'm going to paint in the very far background. I'll use the flat brush here instead of the round brush. I'll paint in the very far background, just the indication of maybe like a forest back there, maybe some more trees. And it doesn't have to be a continual linear line. Like we can have a little bit of it break up right there, have maybe some more come in here. Maybe we can break up a little bit there, have some more on this side, but just to get some trees back there. I think that would be a good thing. And I can go to hue, saturation, and brightness. I feel like these are a little too dark. I may have painted them in too dark, so we can just increase the brightness just a little bit here, maybe to about 55. Maybe increase the saturation. Maybe I'll make them more yellow. And I think that works. I think it's better than before. It adds a little bit more into the scene along the horizon line, so I kind of like that. All right, and now that we have that layer of trees in here, I think we can go above layer 11, the second layer 11 here. I guess we got two of them. We'll go above this one, so below layer 3, and create a new layer there. And we're going to select a soft brush, an airbrush, and I'm going to sample the sky color here, and I'm just going to hit this very softly with a airbrush right here just to get some kind of fog and atmosphere, and that's going to separate these two mountains, create some space in between them. So now it feels more like they're separate instead of maybe connected, and it just pushes these a little bit further in the background. All right, and I want to go to the sky layer here. I feel like this, it almost feels white. This is what we painted in for the sky. And to me, I kind of want to get some color in there. So I'm going to grab this blue, very close to white blue, but it's got more color into it. And I'm just going to paint the top of the sky with this airbrush. And I want it to slowly transition into the whites down here. I think that's better because now we have more of it feels more like a blue sky in there rather than just like a white piece of paper in the background. So maybe I'll go and select these tree layers again. So layer 9 and layer 8. I'm going to select these two and collapse them. And I'm going to turn down the brightness. I think they're a little too bright right now. So we'll go to about 49. A few more things. I'm going to add a character on a new layer here. I'm going to go to the round brush and I'm just going to select this neutral blue, dark kind of silhouette color. I can change it. It's just a placeholder right now. And I'm thinking we could have a character in this scene maybe walking back here in the distance. And if you watch my previous video, I did a similar shaped character here with a hood and cloak. This is just kind of a character that I include in some of my illustrations, but feel free to get creative with it. So maybe they'll be walking back in the grass here. Maybe I'll make them more of a red color to stand out maybe. All right, I'll go on the shadow layer and just give them a little bit of a shadow beneath them. Nothing too noticeable, but it's there. All right, so yeah, so from here, I think this is about good. I may add some more details onto these mountains. I think this background mountain, maybe we could lighten the base color of the mountain a little bit. Here we go. So I'll just I'll just sample this purple there and just draw in these birds. I'll use the selection tool so we get some clean bird shapes. Okay, maybe there, just a few of them. And I'll turn down the opacity so they're not as dark. Maybe I'll make them smaller too. All right, so one last thing I want to do to this painting is at the actually we'll go below the tree layer here. So above this shadow layer, I'll create a new layer and set it to, so again, we're gonna mess with the blend mode here. So tap on the N and we want to set it to overlay, which is down here. Just scroll down a little bit. And this is kind of the opposite of multiply. So we can select a warm color. And in this case, I'll just do like a yellow, kind of a mid-tone, bright yellow here. And I'll grab an airbrush, soft airbrush, and I just want to slightly just airbrush in some vibrant lighting here. So I'll add a few more details to the grass probably, and maybe some details to the mountain, but for the most part, this is it. So I hope this tutorial helped. I definitely want to do more of these in the future, so let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Thanks for watching, and stay creative.